Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Becla de Souza.
And I'm Hugh Davis.
Today we're going to talk about the Cocoa Merchants Association of America's standard contract for cocoa beans.
And firstly, I'd like to apologise for not being here in person, but I hope this setup's quite interesting. I hope you don't laugh at us too much because this is our first time making a video, but I hope it's okay for you guys. Okay, so basically, as Rodrigo said, today we're going to be talking about the Cocoa Merchants of America Association and their model contracts, and it basically focuses on US importers of cocoa from cocoa exporting countries. And basically it's a cash crop and is a critical export of many countries in Africa, South America and Southeast Asia, but also a key import for European countries and America because they don't have the climate to produce cocoa. The largest cocoa producing countries are based along the equator, so it involves a lot of transport from these kind of tropical areas to the markets in Europe and the US. The basic form of the contract is a standard form contract, and this means that it's an unnegotiated contract because one party holds a lot of power, and in this case it's possible because of the US market's economic power over cocoa producing countries. For example, the US export market of cocoa accounts for 0.8% of Ivory Coast GDP, which doesn't seem a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's quite significant. So just to clarify, a standard form contract is a contract between two parties where the terms and conditions of the contract are set by one party and the other party has little or no ability to negotiate more favourable terms. So this model contract was created by the Cocoa Merchants Association of America, which is an association made up of all of the American importing companies of cocoa. Okay, so now we're getting into the meatier parts of the presentation, and we're going to quickly look at the applicable law. Originally, we both thought that the CISG would be the applicable law, but when we looked into it a bit closer, the main cocoa exporting countries are not members of the CISG. For example, Ghana and the Ivory Coast account for 50% of the world's cocoa production, but are not members of the CISG. On the other hand, all main Latin American countries that produce cocoa are parties to the CISG. So the applicable law is basically going to be the private international law of the country where the dispute is brought. And for this model contract, if parties want to incorporate the standard contract, they must explicitly mention in the contract, in writing, subject to terms of Standard Contract 1A of the Cocoa Merchants Association of America Incorporated. So when analysing the model contract, we had a look at the obligations of the seller, and the obligations of the seller are quite burdensome and reflect the interests of the buyers, which are the importers in America, and also reflects the nature of this standard form contract where the American companies had all the power and have drafted this model contract where the sellers in the cocoa producing companies have no real say. It's either take it or leave it. So the first obligation of the sellers is basically deliver the goods and of the correct quantity and quality based on the price specified in the contract. This is similar to the CISG, but we will deal with that later in the presentation as it's to do with conformity. The seller must deliver the correct amount, plus or minus 3%, and if he delivers more than the specified amount in the contract, but it's under 3%, there's no change in price. However, the percentage changes if there is no quantity specified and the buyer says he would like about 2 tons of cocoa beans, then there is a margin of 5%. As we have already said, the nature of the cocoa market, the cocoa beans are quite a vulnerable plant, and as we said, that most of the goods come from the equator and have to travel long distances, usually by sea. As in the model contract, there's a lot of words using shipment and vessels. The contract basically puts the obligation of the correct packaging on the seller, and this is in section 5, and they have some specific requirements that it has to be this specific form of packaging. I think it's called a gunny bag or a gummy bag. and it specifically excludes some other forms of packaging. So some other obligations of the seller also include when they import the cocoa from the exporting countries into America, the seller bears all the risks associated with the Food and Drug Administration. So if the goods are infested or don't meet US quality control, the risk is on the seller. And also, if there are any obligations with the FDA on fumigation, so if the product, it was infested or there has any kind of bugs that are not allowed into the US, the payment for this fumigation is borne by the seller, and again reflects the very strong position the buyers have in these model contracts and also in the global cocoa industry. As the obligations on the seller are quite burdensome, throughout the model contract, it's required that the seller always has adequate insurance. So if anything does go wrong, the seller can claim on its insurance and pay the price. Thank you everyone for your time. I hope you enjoyed this part of the presentation, and I hope technology hasn't failed us. I'm off to get a beer. I hope you enjoy the rest of your tutorial, and I will leave you in the hands of Rodrigo to give the second half of the presentation.
Thank you, Hugh. Enjoy your beer.
Thank you.
And I'll take it from here.